Okay, here's one of the dangers of AI, and also because again, what Google's Gemini is good at is collecting information from the internet and then bringing it into one spot. And so the problem is what if it's pulling bad information from the internet and there's nothing but bad information on the internet, see, or mostly bad information. So it says if you only run one coil on a dual voice coil subwoofer, you effectively have its power handling. That is not true. In fact, you don't lose any power handling at all, and I'll show you why. So here's a dual voice coil. Okay, so the wire comes in, gets wrapped up, and then they tap out. That's one coil. So there's 2 layers per coil. This is a 4-layer voice coil. Okay, so then they roll, come back up, and then they do the other tap. That's 4 layers. So the other thing that is funny is like when a company says it's a 6-layer dual voice coil, that can't happen, or it's very, very difficult to make that happen. It's not worth the manufacturing. Typically, when you see a 6-layer, it's a single voice coil, but that's another video. So what happens is if you just use one coil, that's it. It doesn't hurt anything, and you got to understand that power handling is based on thermal mass of the coil. Now, what does that mean, Patrick? It means that there's a certain amount of material here on the voice coil, right? So there's 4 layers. It's measured in grams, and it's a certain amount of wire. This one happens to be copper. And so there's a certain amount of thermal mass. There's a certain amount of material there that it takes a while to get hot. And so that still exists even if you only use one coil. Now, will the how do I say this? It's kind of hard to explain. Let's use a train for an example. So like the one I ran on your mom. So most trains now, if you see a very long, we're talking about like a cargo train. So they'll have an engine. Let's say there's a long line of cars, and there's an engine on one side and on the other side. So you can make the train move with just one engine. Does the amount of work being done change? No, just one engine's going to work harder than it could in unison with a second engine. Now calculate this. How much fuel has been expended to move the load? Like whatever it is, 100 miles or something like that. That's where it starts getting very fine, but it's basically the same. If you use, say, 1 tank of fuel to move 100 miles using one engine, you should about use half a tank if you use 2 engines to move it. But the same amount of work has been done. The same amount of fuel has been consumed. The load, right, what has been done does not change. It's just whether or not one is working. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated. Or I should say it gets a little, I don't know, kind of, a lot of people don't really think about it. It's hard for them to understand. So this one happens to be a dual 4 voice coil. So if you only run one coil, that's a 4 ohm load to the amplifier, right? And everybody's learned that if you half the impedance, if you go to 2 ohm, the amplifier magically produces double the power. And that is true if you don't adjust the gain. So, and I'll show you this to you. So what happens is you wire the second coil in, let's say, parallel. So now you get 2 ohms. Is the amplifier putting out twice the power? Yes, but it's also distributed between 2 coils. Okay, so if you look at what is being done, the work, and this is where you start getting into, if you look at study physics, and I learned this in high school, if you study physics, what you want to look at is horsepower. Horsepower is the measurement of work. How much work is being done? You take the load and you do something with it. You move it. How much work is being done? The same amount of work is being done. So, but because you use both voice coils, now you only need half the energy rather than pushing all the energy through one. The problem with a voice coil is that the heat dissipation is based on thermal mass. It's also based on surface area, but we won't get into that. but basically it's thermal mass. So the same amount of thermal mass is in the coil. You're not getting rid of the second coil. Do you understand? Now, if you did get rid of the second coil, there would be some power handling differences, right? So, and I've done that sometimes, is where I peel away 2 layers because the version of the coil that I have is too chubby, right? And so I take off 2 layers, and what do you know? It works and it fits. So, but there's more to that than you're talking about. So the other one has to do with amplifiers, in that, and just how I explained, you've learned that if you half the impedance, your amplifier magically produces twice the power, right? Or it's supposed to, or thereabouts. Again, what I talk about is that is true if you don't adjust the gain for the new load setting. So I saw this error, and again, this is a very common error. I actually saw this error back in, I don't know, I think it was 98, 99. It was in the Orion car audio literature for that year. And they were rating the sensitivity of each subwoofer different, whether it was wired in series or parallel. And it was about, I think it was 4 dB or something like that, or 6 dB or whatever it was. And so it appeared as if you wanted to run it in parallel to get a higher sensitivity. The problem is that the sensitivity wasn't a real sensitivity measurement. It was due to the amplifier dropping impedance and putting more voltage out. So, but the load, again, the work that's being done has not changed. So the woofer did not become magically more sensitive by wiring the coils in parallel, because it's a passive device, right? So what happened was somebody put the coils in parallel and then measured the woofer again, right, with the same input, and they go, hey, it's more sensitive. That is not true, because it was getting twice the voltage, actually 4 times the voltage than it was in series from 8. Let's say this is dual 4, so 8 versus 2. So there's a lot of misinformation, and I want you guys to have good information, okay? So finally, some companies have been coming out of the closet about this. So one of them was Memphis. Memphis finally has, let's go back a little bit. Kicker has a switch now on the R series, and they probably have a patent on it where they can switch the coils in series or parallel. And so for a dual 4 sub, it'll either give you a 2 ohm or an 8 ohm switch, and it'll tell you, it'll say this is in 2 ohm mode or 8 ohm mode. And so that switch has probably got a patent on it, so somebody else can't use it. So the way that Memphis got around that by also offering a switch was all they did was connect one coil. So in this case, it would be D4, right? So it's a D4 coil. And so you either get a 4 ohm load or a 2 ohm load. And that's very handy when doing installation. It's also really handy when doing manufacturing, because now you don't have to manufacture 2 SKUs, 2 different versions of the same product. You just manufacture one and put the switch on it, and it basically does the same thing. So Memphis, again, they don't really want to admit what they're doing because it's so taboo. And it really does not help when AI, enforces the taboo and also, the misinformation. So, but I want to give you guys good information. I'm proud to come out and say power handling is the same. Thermal mass has not changed when you run one coil versus 2 coils. Now, is one energized? Is one not, is one helping? If you wire it, and it doesn't matter if it's series or parallel, is it helping? Yes. And that goes back to the train with an engine on one end and the engine on the other. You see what I'm saying? So it's more efficient as far as being utilized. The energy is more dispersed. That's all. So, because you can actually get the same amount of work, which again is related to excursion, by running 1 coil versus 2 coil, if you adjust the output of the amplifier, or the gain, I should say, on the input on the amplifier properly when you either engage 1 coil or 2 coils. I learned this. I learned 2 lessons that day, which was that I was talking to the Pierce Audio brothers, Paul, and I was doing a recon on a Diamond Audio D9, and the only coil that they had in stock that would fit, because on the 15 it uses a 4-inch coil, and it was a D1, and the amplifier that I was using to test it was not half ohm stable. So I was like, well, let me just try one coil to see how it works. And that's when I figured it out. I go, holy shit. The amplifier doesn't magically put out more power. It just senses a lower impedance and it tries to match that. And again, that's limited to the amplifier. It's limited to the headroom that's available. It's limited to whether or not you're maxing out the power supply end of it or the output section of it. So the other thing that I figured out too was I was using an OSC2 from Rockford Fosgate, which is just a little signal generator with a little, a couple of niblets, a couple of nipples, but it has a digital readout, and it was telling me, I looked at the manual, and the manual said that it puts out a maximum of 0.75 volts RMS, not even 1 volt RMS. And it was running that amp into full clipping. And the work that was being done on the subwoofer, I'm like, that fucker was moving 3-4 inches. It was like insane. It was really awesome. But that's when I realized all you have to do is turn the volume down and you'll get the same output as you did. And it didn't matter if the coils were wired in series or parallel or even just one coil. You're still going to get the same amount of work done. So I give a shout out to Mr. Snow, who won Teacher of the Year for Arizona, and he was my physics teacher in 1992. So he's probably long gone and dead, but thank you, Mr. Snow, for teaching me things. So I love you guys. Think, okay? Think. Don't just read from the internet. Think about what's really going on, and I hope this video gets you to think about stuff, okay? I love you guys.